Hello and welcome to the Unnamed Automotive Podcast. My name is Sami Haj Assad, and with me, as always, is my good friend and fellow automotive journalist, Benjamin Hunting. Say hi to the people, Ben.
Greetings, human listeners.
Greetings to everyone. If this is the first time you're listening to our podcast, thank you for trying something new. I will reiterate, Ben and I are a pair of automotive journalists, but more important than that, we're very good friends. Right, Ben?
So we're going to talk about some pretty crappy cars today, and well, at least one of them is it's a negative review. So before we get to that, I want to talk about something a little more positive. Sammy found a book for one of his children called "Old MacDonald Heard a Fart from the Past." Now, I know you're thinking, Benjamin, did you just say fart to get laughs on a podcast? That's pretty cheap. That's not why I said it. I said it because we investigated the author, who had a kind of an unusual stage name, pen name, I guess, and found out that they are British. And in Britain, the book is published with a completely different title.
In Britain, a completely different title. One letter is changed.
No, two letters are changed.
Okay.
In Britain, the book is called Old MacDonald Heard a Parp from the Past. Not only that, but there are 3 other books in this Parp series. So what I'm asking, the reason I'm bringing this up is because I know we have listeners in the UK. Until today, I had never heard the word Parp. Is this a word that is used? And I'm saying this as a Canadian who grew up watching CBC as my only channel, which meant I watched a ton of British comedy, British drama, because CBC loved to rebroadcast that in the 80s and 90s.
But nobody's talking about farts on those.
I mean, I wouldn't have known because the word parp would have just gone over my head. I've never heard this word before. I'm putting it to our listeners. Is that what that word means? And if so, why is this one author, whose name is Olaf Falafel, the only person willing to put it in print? Sammy, back to you.
What's even crazier is that my wife grew up in Ireland. Her brothers both live in the UK. I haven't heard this term before. So I was caught off guard by that. But now, yes, thank you for handing the podcast conch shell back to me. I'm going to give it right back to you so that you can tell people where they can find your non-book, non-word related work. No,
non-word related work.
Non-book related book.
Like my interpretive dance.
Yes, where they can find your latest work on the automotive industry rather than the investigating different words for fart.
I don't even know if I'd use the word investigating. I feel like that's too broad of a term for what I'm actually doing on this quest. But you can find my work at Inside Hook, at Motor Trend, and at Capital One Auto Navigator, and also on the Canadian side at driving.ca.
And you can find my work at the Capital One Auto Navigator as well, and autotrader.ca and driving.ca. As Ben mentioned, we do have a couple of cars that did not really meet our threshold for positive experiences. Yeah, is that the best way to describe a bad review?
I'm going to be complaining about a car that Sammy has already complained about, which means I'm not going to get too in depth.
No.
And I know
your experiences with it differed from mine.
And that's part of why I'm bringing it up again, because sometimes you get a bad press vehicle in the sense that it needs a software update, or it was built wrong, or there's something specifically wrong with that model. But when 2 versions of the same car are driven like 700 kilometers apart,
and months apart.
Yeah, and months apart, which means that the company in question had the chance to, either develop an update that fixes these issues, or at least be aware that it's a problem and make the journalists aware of the issues beforehand. Because don't be surprised, but there are times when we pick up a press car and we're told there is this issue with the car and this issue with the car. Do you still want it? Can you cover around it? Like, when I say cover around it, a lot of times you might pick up a car that has body damage because of something that a previous driver has done. And the automakers try to be upfront with that because they know you need it for photography. And it's hard to photograph a car that has like a huge scratch or a piece that might be missing. And if I'm told in advance, I can accommodate it by shooting around it. So if there's a scratch on the front bumper on the left, I can just shoot the other side of the bumper. I don't have to worry about it. But if there's functionality that's missing, automakers want to let you know that too. Because if you pick up a car to test out a certain feature and that feature is disabled on that car and you only find out when you get home, that's a problem for everyone. And it's a waste of your time and a waste of the car company's time because they could have lent that car to someone else. With the car I'm talking about, the Volvo EX30, all of the problems that I had, Volvo was unaware of. And in fact, they were unaware of to the point where I actually made videos showing them the issues I was having with various features of the car, sent them to them, and they still weren't able to troubleshoot them. So to me, that indicates that there is a problem fundamentally with this car in this moment. And that's why it's important for us to talk about it.
The Volvo EX30, though, I feel really embarrassed about my previous enthusiasm. Before I picked up my tester a few months ago, I was very excited about the concept of the EX30. It was this adorable little small EV. It was targeted for a completely different price point than many other EVs on the market. And to me, I was really getting excited about more mainstream or affordable electric vehicles. And then when I drove it, I realized that one of the major issues I had with it was that the design philosophy of putting everything in the controlling major aspects of the vehicle was only done through the infotainment screen was not really the major issue. It was the reliability of that screen that made my experience really negative. And I had volume issues throughout the whole thing where the volume slider just didn't work. And then I had weird experiences with just relying on, I think, Android Automotive OS, which requires a data connection in a Google account in order to get full functionality of that feature. And I was just caught off guard. I'm like, this isn't really working for me. What was your experience with what was your thoughts on having heard that firsthand from me? And I will reiterate, after we did our story on this, and a few months later, I'm seeing that Americans are driving some of these cars, and I'm reading their take on it, and I'm realizing that they're not seeing the same infotainment issues as we are.
Some of them are, and some of the owners are having the same problems we're having too.
I'm reading that the owners are having more issues than are being reported.
So the problems that I had are similar to the ones you had, but I have a bigger issue with. For me, it goes beyond the glitches in the software.
Okay,
let's talk about
that. Can't be true. I saw the glitches you had, and there's no usability. Like,
even if the vehicle functioned properly, there are still major problems with how the software is designed.
Right.
In my opinion.
Okay.
Well, let's talk about the good things about the vehicle first. We'll get that out of the way.
Yep.
It has decent power. I mean, Volvo was supposed to bring over a single motor and a twin motor version of the vehicle. And the EX30 was touted as, okay, we're going to sell you a $36,000 EV in the US. I don't remember what initial Canadian pricing is or was supposed to be. But what happened was there were a whole bunch of tariffs that were put onto vehicles from the Chinese market. Mm-hmm. Volvo was like, we really want to sell this in North America, so what are we going to do? They decided to, I think, shift operations to a plant they have in Belgium and build the vehicle there and then export it. So that added a lot of time onto the debut of the vehicle, but it also added costs in the sense that all of that retooling was an investment that they had to make. So when it came time to bring the car to America, they started with the twin motor version of the car. With the single motor, it's still not here. I think it's planned to be here in the final quarter of this year. So the most affordable version of the vehicle that you can buy right now, I believe, is at $47,000. Is that right, Sammy? So $46,000 MSRP, which is rough. Yeah. And in Canada, I think it's 57.
Yeah.
That's roughly the same amount of money that you would pay for a Tesla Model 3. Mm-hmm. It has the Volvo has 253 models. When you have model and mile and model and mile, I should have just done some kind of warm up exercise with my lips before we started the show. I believe it's 253 miles of range for the twin motor version of the car, which is, 100 miles less than the Tesla. But in terms of power and performance, it compares really well. This car has 428 horsepower and 400 pound-feet of torque, which in the world of EVs isn't outrageous, but the Volvo EX30 is pretty small, and it only weighs 4,000 pounds. So that's a good power. And considering that the torque is the instant on electric torque, it feels quite lively.
Doesn't it? Like, that was my experience. Like, just anytime you really want to put your foot into it, it just takes off. Like, it's like, wow.
Yeah. And the other benefit of the short wheelbase is that the car is relatively decent in terms of handling. I mean, it's still a heavy car, but it's not as heavy as many of its competitors. I mean, you can look at think about how heavy that M5 I had was. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the differential in horsepower between, say, an M5 plug-in or even an i5 and the EX30, it gets wiped out because you end up being able to take advantage of momentum through corners and whatnot, whereas you would have had to do a lot of braking in a heavier car. So you can have fun with this car. It's all-wheel drive, as befitting a twin motor EV. It has a performance all-wheel drive setting, which when combined with removing the traction control gives you a fair amount of leeway. I had a big slippery week with it. We got a ton of snow, then a bunch of rain, then a bunch of snow. And so I was going back and forth between slush and ice and deeper snow. And I had reasonable amounts of fun with the car. It's not really a sporty vehicle, but it can be engaging if you want it to be. And when you don't want it to be, it has decent power. It's comfortable. The range was good. I saw about a 27% drop at temperatures of minus 19 Celsius, which I think is around minus 4 Fahrenheit. Like, that's very cold. And that's pretty good. I mean, that's about what I would expect. It's actually a little better than I would expect. And it outperforms numerous other EVs that we've tested in recent years. So all of that's good. That's a decent price. I can't really complain. The rear seat is small. It's a smaller vehicle, but I think that some people, if you're shopping for like a Kona EV or something like that, and you're looking at maybe going a class above in terms of power and performance, you get the same size with a lot more guts. So fundamentally, the EX30, I think the philosophy behind it is sound.
Yeah.
The real problem comes when you actually have to deal with the car on a daily basis, because as Sami mentioned, every single function for the vehicle, 99% of functions, are handled by a screen that's mounted in the center of the car. This is problematic for two reasons. The first is the screen is not very well organized. What I mean by that is, since there's no hard buttons, there's like one hard button on the ceiling that turns on the defrost for the rear and the front at the same time.
Yeah, great.
That's pretty much the only hard button you're going to find in the car. There are some buttons on the steering wheel that correspond to controls on the screen, but there's no dial for volume. There's no HVAC controls. It's all in the screen. The HVAC is one of the bigger problems. The controls for heat and the controls for fan speed are separate, and you have to access them via separate commands on the main screen, and you have to divert your attention away from the road while you're doing this. But more problematic are when you need to access features that are almost always traditionally buttons, but have become on-screen features, and you're in a driving situation that makes that dangerous. And I'll give you an example. I was in a blizzard in this car, a straight-up blizzard, hard to see, to the point where I was like, okay, this is a Volvo. I know it has a rear fog light. I should turn that on to make myself more visible. It took me so long to find that in the menu system while I was driving in a blizzard, Sami. Like, very low visibility. I'm looking at the screen. I'm looking at the road. Snow is flying everywhere before I find the on-screen button that turns on that light. That's a huge fail. That is a dangerous situation to put a driver into.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you find it? Where was it?
I did find it. It was like three menus in the safety systems. I had to open the safety systems. So there's a car settings section. And then you open inside car settings, you have to open up to see more features for various safety things. And it was inside of that. And like, it's a feature you're only going to access in a bad situation.
Exactly.
Ever. You're never going to turn it on when you're parked in a parking lot, maybe, but chances are you're driving and you get into some bad weather and you need it. That to me, that's a real problem for this car. So extend that issue to all of the other facets of vehicle ownership and usage that become more complicated because everything's crammed into a little screen. The speed limit, the speed that you're driving is shown in a tiny corner of the screen. There's graphics showing like radar and stuff on another corner of the screen. It's just all crammed together. It's not well organized, and I did not like it. Sami, is there anything about the system that you liked?
I would. Wasn't it a fairly responsive system?
No. I had a situation where I was trying to. So part of the reason why we had problems with the system is due to the fact that it's based on Android Automotive OS from Google.
Yes.
We have had numerous problems with Volvo implementations of this operating system in the past and on a few other vehicles as well. So the issue with this car is that it has Apple CarPlay. It does not have Android Auto, despite the fact that it is a Google system, because it wants you to log in and do everything through the Google Store and whatnot. So when I first get in the car, I pull up the Waze app and it would load the screen, but it wouldn't actually allow me to do anything on the screen. The screen was frozen. So I would see the map, but I couldn't enter in a destination. I couldn't change any features. I couldn't do anything. I ended up going back to just the Google map because it was so poorly done. And in order to move back and forth between the maps, it was just incredibly slow every time.
Okay.
But the real problem started when I tried to pair my phone. I could not maintain a steady Bluetooth connection to the vehicle. Now, I know what you're thinking. Benjamin, is Bluetooth really all that important when you're driving? Well, for me, I like to listen to podcasts. I like to be able to make phone calls. But the bigger issue is Bluetooth is an old technology. Like what, 20 years, 25 years now?
Yeah, at least.
It's not like some kind of blazingly hot cutting edge thing that, oh, maybe Volvo just needs to update some drivers. It's like Bluetooth should work. And when I say it didn't work, I mean, I went to the Bluetooth screen to figure out why my phone kept cutting out, only to see that there's a button that allows you to turn Bluetooth on and off. And it was turning itself on and off while I watched it for 10, 15 minutes at a time, just nonstop. I contacted Volvo. I said, hey, your Bluetooth system is resetting itself over and over. And they're like, that's weird. Did you try system reset? And I had. There's a way to reset the vehicle from inside the infotainment system. I had done that. It did not fix the issue.
Is that like a factory reset or like a turning it on and turning it off?
No.
That's annoying too. I don't want a factory reset. Imagine you've like connected everything. You've got all your settings, all that jazz.
Sammy,
and then you're like, yeah.
I don't have to imagine that. Because I did that.
All of it.
It wiped out every app that was on there. It wiped out every setting, and it did not fix the problem. And so Volvo was like, okay, look, there's a second way to reset things. And I'm like, oh, secret reset. Let's go with this. So they sent me a diagram where you hold two buttons on the steering wheel and it does another reset. I did that as well. Did not fix the problem. And that problem was intermittent, but I would say 60% of the time I was driving the car, I could not keep my phone connected.
What was the secret reset?
So there's a button, there's on the steering wheel, there are two basically like down arrows, like you would use to either navigate an on-screen menu or change the volume on the car. And if you hold those down for a certain amount of time together, it will reset the infotainment system.
I think you sent me like you copied and pasted it to me, and it was unclear as to how long you're supposed to hold those.
Yeah, you just do it till it happens. But I'm just kidding.
That is the funniest thing to me. Nothing says this is quality build like press it until it might take 5 seconds or 30 seconds or maybe 15 minutes. Just keep holding those two buttons.
It was very much a fingers crossed type situation. And I have to say, Volvo was very polite and they tried to be helpful, but they were flummoxed. They did not have the answers to my questions. Other problems that I had with the vehicle.
But wait, hold on. It started working like the next day, right?
It worked intermittently. Like I said, 60% of the time it did not work.
Okay.
The other issues I have with the vehicle, just like Sammy, I could not get the steering wheel controls to make the volume work. Like I couldn't turn the volume up or down with the steering wheel controls unless, and this was again an intermittent thing. And when it would happen, I would have to go onto the screen, hit the volume control on the screen, and then that seemed to wake up the steering wheel controls.
Okay, neither of them worked for me. Neither of them worked when I was using it, which is so funny. Oh my God. Okay.
I had, what was the other issue? Oh, so all of these problems I was having with the vehicle made me not trust it. And this becomes before I get to the trust issue.
Are you going to tell me about the weird waves overlaid waves?
I did talk about that.
Okay, sorry.
I think you were maybe you left the room for a while.
I did, yes. I had to.
Okay.
No, but I mean, I think I can't help but think about how that could possibly... It is like using... It is just so, like you were about to say, unreliable is insane.
But like even more problems. Every time I did manage to connect my phone to the car, it would ask me to upload my contacts to Google. And it's like, continue to do this or change the setting. And I hit change setting and I remove that choice. And then the next time I get in the car, it's already set back to how it was. It never saved any of my preferences.
Right.
Then with all of the safety systems like lane keeping assistant, driver monitoring, all the stuff that Volvo typically offers, you can go in and turn it on and off as you're driving. It doesn't save any of it. Every time I got back in the car, it was reset to like basically blank car, like I was starting out again. Again, Volvo did not have the answers as to why this was happening. I checked online, and there were a lot of other people who had almost identical issues to what I had. So it's not just my problem. This is extremely frustrating. The last problem I had was the day I was returning the car. I was driving on the highway, and the rear radar sensor, I guess, got blocked by slush. Fair enough. It shows a warning on the screen that's quite large. I want to say like 3 inches by 4 inches. It blocks the entire navigation map. It blocks any of the menu systems, and you cannot remove it. No matter what I did, I could not remove it. And it appeared on the screen for 20 minutes, then it disappeared, and then it came back about 10 minutes later and stayed for another half an hour. Okay. So why would you have a warning that is so huge and that you can't turn it off? It doesn't even have an X on the screen to close it. There's a little button, an icon in the bottom left corner that has like a volume control on it, like to turn off an audio alarm that's not sounding. I don't understand how this software made it into customer hands. It is so buggy. And because it's so buggy, going back to the trust thing, it made me not trust other aspects of the vehicle. Specifically, the EX30 does not have buttons on the key fob. You cannot unlock or lock the car remotely. Yes. You have to.
Oh, and every time you do anything, like this was for me, every time I would walk away from the car, especially when I'm like doing groceries or I've got to put things into the car, I put my kid in the car, and then I walk around to the other side, and the car locks itself in the process.
Do you know why it does that?
Why?
Because there's only one sensor for the key fob, and it's on the driver's door.
Yeah, that's so dumb!
So you can't unlock the car.
This is exactly what happened. I would get out of the car, walk around to get my kid from the rear seat, and it would lock. And I'm looking at this car like, what are you doing?
This happened to me too. I mean, I wasn't trying to get your kid, but I was trying to get stuff out of the car. And even more frustrating, let's say you have a load of groceries and you're approaching the car from the passenger side and you just want to put them on the seat or something. You can't do it. You can't open the car. There's no button on the fob to open the locks. So the only way you can open the car is to approach it from the driver's side each and every time. This becomes a problem.
I thought there was a button on the door, or like a sensor like a touch sensor on the door.
Yeah, on the driver's door.
Oh, wow.
Only on the driver's door. So it's the only way you can open the car.
Cheesy.
It's more of a problem when I was walking away because like I couldn't trust that it was going to lock. Everything else about the car is unreliable. So I would have to walk backwards away from the car until I got far enough away for the system to determine I was leaving and then watch for the mirror lights to flash. That's the only way I knew it was locked. This is a terrible ownership experience. Like it's really bad. And it's only one sensor on the car is clearly cost cutting. Like there's no excuse for that.
So that's what I was curious is because this whole everything on one screen is cost cutting in a way as well.
Of course, because the interior of the vehicle is Spartan. There is almost no ornamentation, and fine, but give me a gauge cluster. Just please give me a gauge cluster. And if you're not going to give me a gauge cluster, give me a head-up display. I won't be happy, but at least I'll have my eyes on the road.
Oh yeah, the lack of gauge cluster was wild. Again, so then if anything happens to your screen, as you mentioned, if there's a warning sign that takes up half the screen, there's such an issue with having only one, like that one screen also have your gauge cluster, have your range mileage or your range meter on it.
Yeah, so I was going to charge the car on that very cold morning when I was driving into Montreal where I had that thing on the screen. Volvo does not offer a manual battery preconditioning option. And even if it did, I would not have been able to access it with that thing on the screen. But what you can do is set a charging station that's on your route as a destination, and then it will precondition the battery to get before you get to that destination before you start charging. But I couldn't do that because the screen was completely covered and non-functional as a result of this faulty warning. I had 3 other problems with the car that were unrelated to the infotainment system, but were also probably software issues. I mentioned that it got very slushy. And so to the point where my driveway was fairly treacherous. In the past, I've had some pretty good experiences with the traction control on like a rear wheel drive EV because it's very granular and it can do a pretty good job of maintaining forward momentum. With this car, I pulled into my driveway into the slush and I almost stopped completely. it became unresponsive to the throttle, and it was trying to chug its way through the slush at, I want to say, 1 or 2 kilometers an hour. It just would not accelerate through it. And
Interesting.
it's an all-wheel drive vehicle.
Yeah.
That's very strange to me. And then I was trying to pull out of my driveway after having parked overnight. Some of the slush, I guess, had frozen under the wheels. The rear wheels spun to the point where the car went sideways before the front wheels engaged and gave me traction to pull out of the parking spot. Oof. I want to stress, I'm not hammering the gas here. I'm in my driveway, backing up in my driveway at a slow rate of speed. I went online and I discovered that when you're outside of the performance setting for the all-wheel drive, numerous other owners have had the experience where the all-wheel drive system does not kick in. It is a slip and grip system, which is odd for an EV. Like, especially a premium EV. That's not something I would have expected. And then kind of a follow-up to this situation, there were times where if the vehicle wasn't moving, I could not turn the steering wheel. It was stuck. So like if I was parallel parked and I wanted to crank the wheel to the left to get out of my spot, I couldn't do that. I would have to give it a little bit of movement, and then the steering wheel would pop free and it would let me make my turn.
Oh, right. But this is because this car has no like on-off button or something like that? Isn't that the case?
No, the car is on as soon as you're inside of it. It shouldn't have anything to do with the steering. That doesn't make any sense. And then the final complaint I had that's not really related to software, I could not keep the cabin warm. At between -9 Celsius and -19 Celsius, I had it set to 25 degrees, which is 5 or 6 degrees hotter than I have any other car set to normally. And it was still cold inside the car. And that's, I think, inexcusable, especially for a company like Volvo that comes from a Nordic history. You'd think they would be able to manage like a heat pump that could keep things warm. I was very surprised by that. So that's a lot of complaints about this car. And it's to the point where there's no way I could recommend this to anybody. It's problematic to the degree that no one should drive it. And it's too bad because the bones of a good car are in there. Yep. And I, like Sami, I was excited until I heard about Sami's experiences, and then I was kind of worried. But it's like, wow, like this is a real missed opportunity for Volvo to swoop in. Right now, Tesla is bleeding customers all over the world. Huge market share just gone. And there's an opportunity for companies like Volvo that are like right on that premium edge that Tesla likes to claim to swoop in and get those buyers. And this isn't the car that's going to do it.
It's unbelievable that they can whiff this, and I'm curious. I think there's a pair of new Polestars as well, which are using probably similar bones as this, if not the same. And I think Polestar also uses a heavy, infotainment based control system for their vehicles. And the more you shove all this software into one space, you try to put a lot of computing, put all this computing into one area. You're processing all this data, I suppose. It seems like there's an element, there's a factor that things can go wrong, that you can have hiccups, you can have delays, you can have lag, you can have bugs, you can have just disjointed information everywhere. And all of that comes down to the customer and the driver in this completely unintuitive experience. That easy things that you should be comfortable operating, like HVAC settings, like turning on or off your lights. Those features should not be affected by a potential software bug. Do you know what I mean? Like that's what we're used to up to how many years of motoring? We're used to just being able to click a switch and the lights turn on. You know what I mean?
There's one more thing I want to say that's kind of tied into what you're saying. If you have, so remember I told you that all the safety systems kept resetting themselves?
Yeah.
If you have a driver attention system and I can't turn it off reliably, you can't have a center screen that requires me to look away from the road and then warn me every 2 seconds that I'm looking away from the road when all I'm trying to do is drive the car. And all of your features are pulling my attention from the windshield. And then the car is scolding me for doing something that it is forcing me to do.
That it's problem. You caused this problem. Leave me alone. Yes.
Unbelievable.
That's very fair. Now, as Ben said, occasionally we get vehicles, and the automaker will inform us of something going on with the car. I actually experienced this myself. I was told before picking up my tester which was a 2025 Ram 1500 Rebel, that there was a check engine light on the dash, and it shouldn't affect my experience driving the vehicle. Okay?
Did it affect your experience, Sammy?
It didn't affect my experience driving the vehicle, but it will. That affects my recommendation of the vehicle. Do you know what I mean? Is that fair to say? Anyways, this Ram Rebel 1500 is an off-road oriented version of the Ram. Once again, I'm going to have to point out that most trucks should be capable off-road, with four-wheel drive being as large as they are, having, as much ground clearance as they do. I'm confident that most people will be able to go in 90% of their off-road excursions, be it a trail or a cottage trail or whatever.
They could keep up with the wilderness, is what you're saying.
They probably could. Now, the Rebel is verifiably off-road oriented because it has no side steps, it has no rock rails. That those items get caught on bigger obstacles that can impact your off-road capabilities. It also runs on I had Goodyear Wrangler off-road all-terrain tires, or off-road tires, which again do not come on the standard vehicles and should enhance the vehicle's off-road capability. And in addition to that, the Ram Rebel is outfitted with a very comprehensive array of cameras and views that help you place this ginormous vehicle on the trail. So all of these features were pretty nice, pretty impressive. And I will bring up this engine, this Hurricane twin turbo inline six engine, which makes I'm going to double check on my notes here, but I believe it's 400 and what's the number here?
Well, there's two tunes for it, right?
Yes, 420 horsepower. There's a more powerful output, which is 540.
Yeah, that's what I had when I was towing in the fall.
Right. So I had the 420, and that's pretty comparable to the 5.7 Hemi that used to be in this engine, I believe.
What's the torque rating? I would assume it's higher than the V8. That's why I was asking.
469 pound-feet of torque. And I was comfortable. This motor was really, really good. If I didn't have this nagging check engine light on the car, I wouldn't have realized there's something to be worried about.
I think the check engine light was because your side steps were missing.
Yeah, probably. Now, what's funny about this is I talked to other journalists upon returning it, and they told me months ago that they had this check engine light. And I told them that I actually experienced another kind of issue. Every time I would come to a stop, and when the automatic engine start stop was active, as in it turned the motor off at the stop, I would get a random brake light pop up on the dash. Just an exclamation mark, brakes, exclamation marks. The brakes were still there. They're still working.
Exclamation mark, or it was an exclamation mark over a brake?
An exclamation mark over the brakes.
Okay, because that first one, I would be like, wow, that's they're worried too,
Yeah. And the brakes were working fine. The car was holding the brakes, no problem. And then as soon as the engine fired up, and I would drive it for a couple of feet, that sign would go away. So I don't know what the heck is going on with this car, because those two things really worried me about my overall experience. But this is my first taste of this generation of Ram. I've always liked the Rams. I've always thought that they had a lot of nuance in their lineup, in which they had really affordable basic models, and then some really cool either high performance or high end versions of their trucks. And I really liked that they had that degree of variability, and that you could have systems where you'd have really gorgeous leather, you could have really good infotainment system, you could have air suspension. You had all of these features that can come together in a Ram. And it made me think that the Ram was appealing in a different way to the F-150 and the Silverado, which I think were a little bit more. They were stuck inside of a box. This is what a pickup truck is, and this is what it does.
Harsh words.
And I think that the Ram was able to go beyond that box more consistently, easily, and it was more impressive in those functions. However, now in this generation, I'm worried that they're getting stuck a bit. The cheapest version of this car is still 40 grand, which I think is a lot for a basic truck. And then the top trim is the tungsten, which is about 90 grand. My vehicle was a Rebel. It was outfitted with a ton of equipment. I'm going to double check the
Are these Canadian
pricing.
prices or US prices?
Those were US pricing. 1 second. My Rebel is probably about 80 grand, which is a lot. And I think you can get the full off-road version of the Rebel, which is called the RHO, for about that much money as well.
Isn't the RHO the TRX with the twin turbo engine?
Yeah, but it doesn't have 700 horsepower. It just has, I think, the 540 horsepower.
Okay. I see what you're
I don't
saying.
think they added more horsepower for it. Yeah. So it had the top trim, the high output version of the straight six, but with, and not only that, this Rebel has the same locking diff as the RHO. So I don't know really what the major element here is. And I'll admit, I think that the old motors had a lot of personality. They sounded really good, the old V8s, and these inline sixes do not. I also was expecting better fuel efficiency. I got, mostly because I drive around town, I got around 20 liters per 100 kilometers, which is not good. About 11 or maybe 12 miles per gallon.
Pretty standard when it comes to
a truck in the city.
Full-size pickup, I would say.
Now, this truck is massive. I also had tow mirrors that stuck out really badly. It was, I don't know. It's just insane how big these trucks are. And I think that maybe just because I'm driving the Rebel and maybe the interior quality is catered to more off-road. Maybe they think that the people who are buying these might not care for higher quality materials. But to me, the interior quality was really underwhelming compared to what I've seen a Ram offer. Now, it might be because of the trim level thing, but it was just a totally standard truck. It had a ton of space inside, but that was it for me.
I think it's definitely the trim level.
Okay. Like I said, I really like the motor. The transmission actually was really good. I didn't notice shift shock. I didn't notice it missing gears or taking too long to upshift or downshift. One of the major elements I really struggled with were those tires. As I mentioned, Goodyear Wrangler all-terrain tires, I think definitely not oriented for the cold weather that we were going through. As Ben said, he went through a blizzard. I had a very brief but heavy snowfall that I had to drive this truck through, and did not like the feeling of these all-terrain tires at all. They slipped a lot, they skidded a lot, and when I got home, having to deal with some of the snow or ice on my driveway, I actually really struggled to put this thing directly where I wanted to because of how much they slipped, and they make that awful. You've heard what like all-terrain tires sound like when they burn, right? They just have this awful squeal to them. And I just felt silly in my lane that everyone was hearing me kind of like struggling to put my car on my driveway. And obviously this truck was too big. I couldn't put it in my garage too, which is unfortunate.
All-terrain tires are garbage in the winter. Straight up.
Garbage. Absolutely garbage.
It's the same thing. I had them on the Ranger Raptor like last month, and they were terrible.
So, and I think that's a really important thing to point out. I know that off-roading and snow driving may seem from a distance that they're similar, but they are so far apart. It is not the same thing.
And the problem is temperature. People don't understand. Yes. They use terms like snow tires. Really, these are winter tires. They are temperature related. The rubber is formulated to be able to grip when the temperature goes below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, which is right when you start to see differences for all seasons in winter tires. And you're looking at things like handling, stopping distance. It's more than just grip when you're pulling away from a stop sign or something like that. So just because the tread could throw a lot of mud doesn't mean it's going to be able to throw a lot of snow, because chances are that tire is stiff as a board once the temperature drops.
Yeah, that's right. So those are my first impressions with the 1500 Rebel. It also had a few gimmicks inside, like a passenger screen that was curiously really dim. My passenger was like, this is neat, but I don't really know what the point of it is, and it's very dim. There was an HDMI port in the center console, but we don't really drive around with like a DVD player or a Nintendo Switch or something, right? Maybe we should start doing that. Is that something
when your son
we should do?
Old enough, you'll start doing that.
But he'll be playing it. The screen is in the front passenger seat. It needs to be in the rear, doesn't it?
Sammy, it's not about your needs.
The screen is massive on this thing, though. Not the 10.3-inch passenger display, but the 14.4-inch infotainment screen is huge. It's responsive, in my opinion. I also had some weird oddities pairing my Android device to the car, but those worked, I think, on day 2 or day 3. Suddenly, the car and my phone were best friends, and they worked pretty seamlessly after that. And it has some wireless phone chargers with a clip that holds it really nicely in place. I'm currently driving a Toyota Crown, which does not have one of these clips.
Did you
but
just
has
drive a Crown?
No, I drove the Crown Sigma.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Signia.
Sorry, Your Majesty. I didn't realize.
The Signia.
Heavy is the head that drives the Crown. I get it.
Now I'm driving the Crown Nothing after the name Crown. Just
Crown Nothing.
Just Crown. And it has a vertical oriented wireless phone charger, and it does not hold my phone in place. And I like the way the Ram did it, which was with a really heavy duty clip. I was happy with that. Tons of USB chargers, which I thought was really handy too. And lots of interior space, lots of interior storage, lots of interior space. My son had plenty of space for his rear-facing car seat.
But not enough space for him to play video games, apparently.
That's right. He's on that screen time lockdown, really.
Okay. So here's a question. You say your son is on a screen time lockdown, but you put him in all these cars that have all these screens.
It's a rear-facing car seat. It doesn't see anything.
Wow. So that's your situation. Your solution to this problem is to stick his head in the virtual sand and face him away from the screen. So.
But I mean, what do the screens show? Most of the time, it's just on an Android Auto screen of my navigation.
The screens are going to be hypnotized.
He does. He really does.
Remember the Grand Wagoneer? Doesn't it have the ability to show like a fire on the screen, like a fireplace?
Yeah, I had that in the Lincoln recently.
And there's like 11 screens, so you could have 11 fires going. I think your son would like that.
Just being surrounded with fire? I think
it would feel warm and safe.
I think he will be worried. I think he'll become too familiar with fire.
Well, that's always a risk.
Yeah, and I don't want that.
I'm not going to deny that.
It has a air suspension, as I mentioned. The ground clearance, I think in the normal ride height, is around 8.7 inches, and it can lower 2 inches or raise 2 inches from that. I really recommend, because it doesn't have side steps, you've got to lower this car every time you park it, or else you risk like falling out and twisting your ankle, or really getting your pants dirty when jumping back into the car, into the truck. I swear I've been in some vehicles with air suspension that automatically apply the lowest setting whenever you park them. I think Defenders do that.
But those are also luxury vehicles. I mean,
I guess
does the Ram have a sensor underneath it to tell you that it's going to hit something? I mean, this is an off-road vehicle, right? So theoretically, you might not have the ground clearance to lower it, and maybe that's just a sensor they didn't install.
Yeah, I think that's the most reasonable thing, is that when you're taking it on a trail, you might be parking it on top of some rocks or uneven ground.
And they're relying on you as the driver to like take a look before you lower it, maybe. This is me making excuses for the system. I don't know if this is why it's doing it.
I think that's it. I think that's 100% a rationale for it. I think it's a reasonable excuse, but for somebody who's using a truck as an everyday commuter, that was really annoying to have to do every single time I park the car. Press that lower button a couple of times, and that is not a physical button. It's a screen button, which is also a little frustrating for me, because it doesn't have tactility to it, and I don't know whether or not the car is actually starting to lower until I see the little icons pop up, and I feel like I've just tapped the screen like 17 times before that's happened. You know what I mean?
I do understand.
Other elements of the car is that what was I going to say?
Something about the Rebel.
The Rebel. Yeah, so I think that I would have such an easier time recommending this truck if it didn't have these warning lights on it. And I know they're inconsequential. They didn't really mean anything. But if you're in an $80,000 truck with all of these options, and you have to go to the dealership for any reason outside of scheduled maintenance, especially vague, invasive problem, this is an awful experience.
It is.
Like that is not a great ownership experience.
I do recommend, though, that people pick up little dongles for the check engine lights. They're about $30, and they'll attach to an app on your phone. You used to have to get an actual reader, like a handheld,
Yeah.
big plastic, and those readers always had like they were rugged because they assumed you were going to be using them as a mechanic and you were going to drop it, so it was protected. But these days, it's literally a dongle that's probably the size of an eraser or something, or a Hot Wheels car, and you plug it into the OBD2 port, and then it will not only will it let you check all your codes, but you can run tests and check other codes on some vehicles. And I use it in my Jeep because I don't have a full set of gauges in the Jeep, like I don't have a tachometer and stuff. But you can get these other apps that work with these dongles. I have one called Dash Commander, and it allows me to set up a set of virtual gauges, like a virtual dashboard on my phone. And I can see engine speed, I can see transmission status, the heat of the transmission, all sorts of stuff like that. So it's pretty handy. And the cool thing is you can bring it from one car to the other if you need to. Like, it's not locked into a car. So it's a great way to have peace of mind. You don't have to end up going to AutoZone to get these codes pulled. It will not only provide you with what the code is, but 90% of the time it will explain what the code is. So that's helpful too.
I agree. That's a great point. I think everyone should probably have one of these things, and especially they become so much cheaper. And again, like you mentioned, Bluetooth, but you need an app, right?
Yeah, but most of them either come with their own app or they're capable of interfacing with the most popular free apps that are out there.
Okay. The app thing I thought you'd be stressed out about the app thing.
In what sense?
In that you don't know where your data is going.
I do know where my data is going because it tells you. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Well, again, I wanted my fuzzy feelings for the Ram, the last generation Ram, which I thought was a class leader, to continue with this new generation, but I think that they've maybe let off the gas a little bit. And I'm curious as to what's going to happen next, because Stellantis, the parent company Stellantis, is going through some really, really awkward transitions. They have cut, I think, their CEO loose and have started changing or reversing some of the policies that leadership had in place. And specifically with the Ram, which I think is now on an only 6-cylinder lineup, there's a chance that a V8 might come back. And I don't know if that's a positive or a negative, if that's what's changed the development of this truck in a negative sense. Because to me, nothing really stood out to me that the engine or the powertrain is what was limiting this truck in any way.
Now, my question to you is, do you think Ram has lowered its standards, or do you think they have merely pushed everything up the trim level ladder to the point where now when you're spending this $80,000 on a truck, you're getting a more basic vehicle, whereas in the past maybe you would have gotten that luxurious style Ram? Like, now do you just have to spend more money to get what you got in the past?
Yeah. No, I think what it is actually it's a combination of those two elements. I think the last generation Ram, and I think even the Ram before that, pushed the envelope a lot further than they had to in order to be competitive with the Titans at GM and Ford. Because I think sales-wise, the Ram has always been behind those two. In terms of the F-150 and the Silverado and Sierra combined, right? And I think they were really effective at doing that. I think it created a lot of really positive mind share or positive impressions on journalists and the media. And I think anybody who walked into a dealership and saw a fully loaded or even mid-trim Ram 1500 with the leather, with the big screens, with the gorgeous wheels, came across really impressed. And I think that was not sustainable. And I think in this new generation, they had to cut down on some of those elements while also pushing up prices. And then the competition has also improved. I think the new Sierra you've mentioned is really good in terms of quality, in terms of technology. And Ram is struggling to justify the application of higher end materials and technology in their truck, and then struggling to justify just the pricing as well. So I think it goes both ways. I think we've expected something from them that they can't deliver sustainably anymore, and they need to make more money on each truck and in order to do that, they've got to make the trucks a little bit lower end than they used to be, I suppose.
So anything else you want to say about the Ram?
Yeah, like I said, I would recommend this if it didn't have a check engine light. Do you know what I mean? And if you weren't getting the Rebel, probably. I think that would be my main points of concern.
So no Rebel.
No Rebel. I suppose if you're going to go off road, get the RHO. That probably will do the trick, and it's just as cool. But I'll wait to give that real verdict. That's not my final verdict on that. Maybe I'll have to test that in RHO or hear your thoughts on the RHO before doing so. But you drove the Limited and you came across pretty impressed with it, and you were
But I had a
toying
ton
with
of
it, right?
problems. I had a ton of problems with it. I had the air suspension fail on it.
Oh yeah, the air suspension.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I had a lot of issues with all of the towing software not working properly. So it was a
Wild.
very mixed bag.
Again, nothing really with powertrain.
Well, I mean, yeah, the engine was fine. I liked the engine quite a bit.
So interesting. Are we becoming like are customers complacent with like problematic truck vehicles? That's a lot of
What do
like
you mean by
that's-
complacent?
We've got 2 trucks on the podcast today. 2 vehicles on the podcast today with issues that made them unreliable. The bare bones of the vehicles were good, but the experience was not. Do you know what I mean?
I don't think it's a customer issue. I think it's a company issue.
Why are the companies? These are 2 different companies from 2 different parts of the world, 2 different kinds of customers, and yet they deemed this totally acceptable to give to people.
Because we're back, we've gone full circle. There was a period of time where you couldn't really buy a bad car. And now we're back to the point where cars are complicated enough that there are several cars out there that you can't recommend because they are too complicated and do not work properly. And the car companies have done this to themselves by installing features that maybe we want, maybe we are asking for, maybe we need. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what their customer research says. Does their research say, yeah, we want these complicated infotainment systems and complicated suspensions and equally complicated engine management systems? It's worth the people coming in and complaining. Like, we'll have 5% of people will hate it, but 95% will love it. I don't know. But I can't give a blanket. You know, there was a time when I think the Mitsubishi Mirage was like the only bad car on the market.
Yeah.
And now you could spend a lot of money on a bad car if you wanted to.
That's right. Yeah.
Or, you know, the bad car is like it's a very loose term. I mean, non-competitive car that's going to cause you stress, car that doesn't work properly. I mean, this is how I would position these cars.
And so that's what I'm saying is that like we didn't have non-competitive cars. We had cars that were not.
Well, I mean, as long as the Mitsubishi Outlander was on the market, we had
non-competitive currently. Cars. We didn't drive currently, right now, today. We didn't drive non-competitive cars.
I don't understand what you're saying.
The Volvo EX30, if you took out the equation, the infotainment from the equation.
If you entirely redesigned the cabin and the driving experience, I think that's a bit of a stretch.
If you were not going to talk about that element of it, but you're talking about the performance, the space, the mileage that it got,
I don't
the
think
charging
you can divorce
speed.
those things. I think it's really like it's too simple to say that that's what makes it non-competitive. Obviously, the car is not properly executed and was not developed properly. It was cheaped out on, and we're seeing the results of that. I think it's more nuanced than what you're saying for that car in particular.
All right, I agree with that. Perfect. For that though, let's end this podcast. Let's finish today's episode. What do you think? Do you have anything else you want to say?
No, go for it. I want to
hear.
You
sure?
I want to listen to you.
You want to listen to me try to finish this episode?
Yeah, that's what I've been waiting for an hour.
If you enjoy if you enjoyed this week's episode, I really encourage you to head on over to our website, unnamedautomotivepodcast.com, and subscribe. Look at all of our previous episodes. What was the thing that we usually do on that? You see all of our previous episodes. There's photos of them. You can subscribe to our previous episodes to our entire podcast using a bunch of buttons on the top of the site. But more important than that, I think you should go to the site to get in touch with us. We really like hearing from people, hearing their thoughts, hearing their experiences, hearing their feedback, hopefully positive feedback on the podcast. There's a contact form at the website. You just fill it out, and it lands in our inbox. I really, really love that. I think that's my favorite part of what we do. We get to hear from you people. However, if you don't want to go through the website, you want to do it the old-fashioned way, you head on over to your email client and just email Benjamin at benjaminhunting.com, or you can head on over to Instagram at huntingbenjamin is Ben, or you can find me. I'm at Sami_ha, like you're laughing.
Sammy, what are you going to be talking about next week?
As I mentioned, I've got the Toyota Crown, not the Crown Signia, the Crown Nothing. I'm experiencing that, and that's that.
I'm driving the Honda Pilot Trail Sport, which I think is in its final year in this generation. Am I correct on that? It's about to be redesigned?
I'm not sure.
Okay, well, we'll find out next week.
You're the one checking it out.
Thank you for listening, everybody.
See you next time. Oh, and tell us about the parp and the fart situation.
Oh, my goodness.
Okay, bye.